He once fed two alien orphans a loaf of bread. Years later, they returned wanting more than his protection. Let's begin the story. The wind screamed across the surface of Nix 9 like a wounded beast, its howls slicing through the frozen streets of Frost Point Colony. The snow came in relentless sheets, driven sideways, as though the planet itself resented the presence of fragile human life. Brendan Thorne pulled his threadbare thermal jacket tighter around his shoulders, though the gesture did little against the cold. At 53, he knew the difference between a fight he could win and one he couldn't. Against Nix 9's winner, no man ever truly won, he could only endure. His boots crunched into the knee-high drifts as he trudged through the outer lanes, a burlap sack clutched tight against his chest. Inside were fresh loaves of bread, their warmth still faintly radiating through the coarse fabric, a treasure in this desolate place. The colony's weather control systems had failed so many times that no one bothered filing complaints anymore. The atmospheric regulators were supposed to blunt Nix 9's savage climate, but 15 years of neglect and bureaucratic apathy had left the systems broken beyond repair. Brendan muttered a curse, his breath vanishing into vapor that the wind tore away instantly. 15 years on this rock, and they still can't keep the sky clear. Terran bureaucracy at its finest. His voice was swallowed whole by the gale, leaving him once again in silence with his thoughts. There had been a time when Brendan's steps carried the confidence of command, when his voice could be heard across a battlefield, rallying soldiers in the face of fire. 25 years of service in the Terran Defense Force had carved scars into him, some etched into his flesh, others buried deeper where no medic's tools could reach. He had led platoons through alien jungles and icy trenches, seen comrades cut down, watched victories turn hollow. When the war ended, or rather when the politicians decided the wars were no longer worth fighting, Brendan was handed a pension barely large enough to scrape a living. And so he'd bought a tavern at the far end of human-controlled space. The building was squat and ugly, patched together from local stone and plast steel imports, but it was his. After decades of taking orders, the simple fact of owning something, of answering to no commander but himself, felt like salvation. He rounded the final corner, the low outline of his tavern, coming into view through the storm. The sign above the door creaked, the wayward soldier, swaying on rusted chains. Brendan often thought the name fit both the tavern and its proprietor. That was when he saw the movement in the alley beside the building. He stopped, narrowing his eyes against the flurries. Two small figures huddled against the wall, half buried in drifting snow. His instincts sharpened instantly. Even retired, the old soldier in him never fully slept. He shifted his grip on the bread sack and stepped closer. Boots crunching. "Hey!" His voice boomed hard and commanding. "This is private property." The figures flinched as though struck. Slowly they turned toward him, and Brendan felt something twist in his chest. They weren't thieves or vagrants grown desperate. They were children. Lumari children. Their skin was a pale blue, luminescent. Even in the dim light, their eyes enormous and glowing faintly with an inner radiance unique to their species. Twin girls no more than 12 standard years old stared back at him. Their silver-white hair spilled from beneath ragged hoods, tangled and stiff with ice. The threadbare coats they wore were suited to temperate climates, not this frozen hell, and they shivered violently as they tried to remain upright. "Damn it," Brendan muttered under his breath. The Lumari were known as artist dreamers, peaceful souls. What in God's name were two of them doing here, abandoned at the edge of a human frontier colony? One of the girls stepped forward, squaring her thin shoulders as though preparing for a firing squad. "We're sorry, sir," she said, her voice lilting with the melodic cadence of her people. "We'll go." The words stabbed deeper than any blade. Brendan looked at their trembling hands, their hollowed cheeks, the fragile spark of hope and fear mingling in their eyes. His first instinct was to walk away, to let the authorities or fate or whatever gods watched over this frozen wasteland deal with them. He had spent too many years watching innocents suffer. He had carried enough burdens that weren't his. But then memory struck him like a thunderclap, a battlefield on Tay 4, where he'd lain bleeding in the mud, abandoned, until an alien medic enemy by uniform had risked everything to drag him to safety. Brendan's voice softened, though he tried to mask it with gruffness. "Come inside," he ordered. He nodded toward the back entrance of the tavern. "Too damn cold to stand out here talking." The twins exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. "We have no money," the second girl whispered, identical voice echoing her sister's. "Did I ask for any?" Brendan snorted. "Move it before we all freeze solid." Inside warmth hit them like a physical force. The tavern's kitchen was cramped, the air filled with the scent of roasted roots and stale ale, but compared to the outside, it was heaven. The girls' blue skin flushed slightly as circulation returned to their extremities. They hovered uncertainly until Brendan barked, "Sit." He pointed at the small wooden table in the corner. He busied himself at the stove, ladling thick vegetable soup into bowls, then sliced the warm loaves. He set the steaming food before them, watching as they hesitated only a heartbeat before hunger overpowered fear. They ate with careful restraint, as though afraid the meal might vanish if they devoured it too quickly. "What are your names?" Brendan asked after a while, leaning against the counter. Ivana said the first. Lena said the second. "Brendan Thorne," he replied automatically. His eyes narrowed. "What are two Lumari kids doing alone on Nix 9? This isn't a tourist spot." The girls shared another of those silent glances before answering. "Our parents were researchers," Ivana said carefully. "There was an accident 3 months ago." Brendan frowned. He vaguely recalled the news: an explosion at the xenobiology facility across the colony. "And no one's looking after you." Lena shook her head. "The human authorities contacted our homeworld, but the Lumari Collective doesn't give a damn about two orphans on a backwater colony." Brendan finished grimly. "Politics. Always politics. Earth and the Collective were locked in trade disputes. No one cared about collateral damage." The girls admitted they had been squatting in abandoned storage near the spaceport until someone changed the locks. Brendan turned away, ostensibly checking the oven, but in truth to hide the flash of anger that tightened his jaw. He didn't need this. He didn't want responsibility. He had his own demons. When he turned back, the table was empty. The bowls neatly stacked, the back door ajar. The girls had vanished like ghosts, leaving only the faint ozone scent their species carried. Brendan stood there staring at the empty doorway, concern pressed against his chest, unwanted and insistent. Then he shook his head violently. "Not my problem," he muttered. "Not my problem at all." Yet the words rang hollow even as he locked the door against the howling wind. The next morning dawned gray and merciless, the storm still raging outside the tavern walls. Brendan moved through the motions of his routine, wiping down the bar top, stoking the stove, and setting out mugs for the handful of miners who would come stumbling in for warmth and drink despite the weather. His hands were steady, but his thoughts kept circling back to the two Lumari girls. He told himself it was foolish to wonder about them. They were resourceful enough to survive this long, and sooner or later someone would take them in, or they'd vanish the way strays always did on frontier worlds. Still, every time the door creaked in the wind, his head jerked up in expectation. The tavern was empty when the front door finally swung wide, and the blast of cold air made the candles flicker. 3 figures stepped inside their presence, immediately altering the atmosphere. Brendan didn't need the distinctive gray uniforms to recognize colonial security. The leader was a Vexari, tall and broad, his exoskeletal plates mottled green-gray like a weathered statue. 4 amber eyes gleamed from his angular face, mandibles twitching in subtle irritation. His insignia marked him as Inspector Krell. Behind him came 2 officers, also Vexari, their secondary limbs hovering casually near their sidearms. Brendan straightened slowly, rag in hand, as though he were just another tavern owner meeting customers. "Inspector," he greeted evenly, voice gruff but polite. "What can I do for colonial security drinks on the house for peacekeepers?" Krell's mandibles clicked once, a sound the translator rendered as annoyance. "We're not here for refreshment. We're looking for 2 Lumari juveniles, females, twins." Brendan's heart gave a traitorous lurch, but he kept his expression as neutral as carved stone. Years of interrogation training had taught him how to mask the truth. He resumed wiping the bar, shrugging with deliberate indifference. "Lots of folks come through here. Can't say I recall any Lumari kids." The inspector slid a data tablet across the counter with one of his lower limbs. These would not be easy to overlook. Blue skin, silver hair, about 12 standard years old. Brendan glanced at the images. Ivana and Lena stared back at him from the screen, their innocent faces captured in official coldness. He fought the urge to curse. Instead, he leaned casually against the counter. Sorry, haven't seen them. Krell's four eyes narrowed. These children are persons of interest in an ongoing investigation. Their parents were researchers at the xenobiology facility destroyed 3 months ago. They may have access to sensitive data that certain parties would pay handsomely to obtain. Brendan let out a short, derisive laugh. They're kids. What you think they walked out of a lab carrying classified research in their pockets? This is not a jest, Thorne Krell snapped his mandibles, clacking sharply. If you encounter them, you will notify us immediately. Harboring undocumented aliens is a serious offense. At the far end of the room, one of the officers muttered something in his native tongue. The translator picked up enough to render it into standard their Lumari. That's reason enough. Heat rose in Brendan's chest, old anger flaring like dry tinder. He had seen too many wars start with that kind of thinking, reducing people to species, stripping them of worth. His grip on the rag tightened until the fabric tore slightly, but he forced himself to meet Krell's eyes evenly. If I see them, Inspector, you'll be the first to know, he said flatly, sliding the tablet back across the bar. Now, unless you plan on staying for that drink, I've got work to do. For a long, tense moment, Krell studied him, all four eyes unblinking. Brendan stared back, unyielding, until finally the inspector clicked his mandibles in irritation. See that you do. We'll be watching. With that, the trio turned and left the door banging shut behind them, leaving the tavern colder than before. Brendan stood motionless for several minutes, the rag still clenched in his fist. He knew the type security officers who followed orders without caring what the truth might be. If the twins were caught, their lives would be reduced to bargaining chips in the endless games of politics. Not my problem, he told himself again. But the words rang hollow. That night, after the tavern emptied, and he was left alone with the hiss of the stove, Brendan found himself staring at the shadows in the corners. He imagined two small figures huddled there, silver hair, tangled eyes wide with fear. He poured himself a measure of cheap whiskey, but it burned less than the thought of what might happen to them. The bottle sat untouched afterward, the silence of the tavern pressing down heavier than the storm outside. He told himself he'd done the right thing. He hadn't betrayed them, hadn't handed them over. That was enough. But deep down, Brendan knew that the hollow ache in his chest was not just loneliness. It was the echo of a choice unfinished. 10 years bled away on Nix 9 each winter, indistinguishable from the last, until even memory seemed to freeze beneath the endless gray sky. Frostpoint Colony grew slowly, its population swelling, as atmospheric regulators were repaired enough to make the climate marginally more bearable. More settlers meant more customers, and the Wayward Soldier Tavern prospered modestly under Brendan's care. At 63, Brendan had weathered into the role of tavern keeper, like stone settling into its place in the landscape. His once dark hair had surrendered fully to gray, and the lines carved into his face had deepened into canyons. Yet he remained strong, his body still tempered by years of soldier's discipline and the forgiving pull of Nix 9's lower gravity. He no longer looked like the soldier he once was, but the quiet steel never left his posture. The tavern had become a kind of institution. Miners, traders, and security personnel all passed through its doors, finding warmth and familiarity in Brendan's gruff hospitality. He had earned a reputation as fair, if not particularly friendly, a man who kept order with a single bark command and poured drinks with steady hands. For the locals, he was simply part of the colony itself, unchanging, reliable, like the stone walls that held back the storm. Yet in the quieter moments when the fire burned low and the laughter of patrons had faded, Brendan sometimes thought of two girls with silver hair and luminous eyes. He wondered if they had survived that winter, if they had escaped colonial security's grasp, or if their bones lay hidden in some snowdrift outside the settlement. The thoughts never lingered long. He had learned long ago that dwelling on ghosts did no good, but they returned now and then, like the echo of a song half forgotten. On one such afternoon between the lunch rush and the evening crowd, Brendan was wiping down the counter when he felt rather than heard something unusual. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the tavern's walls, unlike the growl of cargo freighters or the rattle of mining shuttles. This sound was smoother, more refined, like music woven from energy itself. Brendan frowned, setting the rag aside. He stepped out into the brittle daylight, squinting as snow reflected the sun into his eyes. What he saw froze him in place. Hovering just above the street, less than 20 meters from his tavern, was a vessel unlike any he had seen in his years on the frontier. Its hull gleamed in shifting tones of silver and blue colors, flowing across its surface like liquid metal. The lines of its design were graceful, organic curving with a natural elegance that stood in stark contrast to the blocky utilitarian ships common in human colonies. Brendan didn't need markings to know its origin. This was Lumari craftsmanship, not just any vessel either. This was a luxury star yacht, the kind owned by the wealthiest elites of the Lumari collective. It radiated opulence, every curve whispering of artistry and extravagance. As he watched, a ramp extended from the ship's side, lowering with silent precision until it touched the packed snow. From within, two figures emerged. They were women, Lumari, tall and impossibly elegant. Their blue skin glowed faintly in the pale sunlight, and their silver-white hair cascaded down their backs like molten moonlight. They wore identical form-fitting suits that shimmered as though woven from starlight itself, adorned with intricate patterns that glittered with gemstones. Every step they took was synchronized, graceful, deliberate, the sort of poise only beings raised among privilege or power could possess. Brendan felt a jolt of recognition, though his mind resisted it. Their faces were hauntingly beautiful, but beneath the poise and polish, something flickered, something familiar. The women stopped a few paces away, studying him with unreadable expressions. One tilted her head slightly. Her voice was melodic, tinged with an accent he remembered from long ago. Brendan Thorne. He swallowed, suddenly aware of the dishcloth still clutched in his hand. That's me. If you're looking for accommodations, I'm afraid my place isn't up to the standards you're used to. The two exchanged a glance, silent communication flashing between them. Then one stepped forward. Her luminous eyes softened as she spoke. Do you remember two freezing alien girls whose lives you once saved? The words hit him like a physical blow. Brendan stared, his mind scrambling back through years of memory. Slowly, impossibly, he whispered their names. Ivana, Lena. Their faces broke into identical smiles, and suddenly he could see them, the children they had been hidden beneath the refined masks of the women they had become. You remember us, Lena said, her voice carrying a note of quiet triumph. Brendan's chest tightened. What are you doing here, Hal? He gestured vaguely at the gleaming vessel behind them, the jewels, the poise. How did you... It's a long story, Ivana interrupted gently. One we would prefer to tell inside, if you don't mind. For a moment, Brendan stood rooted to the snow, overwhelmed by the absurdity of it all. Two orphans he'd fed once now returned a decade later aboard a ship worth more than everything on Nix 9 combined. Finally, he found his voice. Of course. Come in. He led them into the tavern, the contrast almost laughable. The worn wood, the stone walls, the smell of ale and stew, seeming shabby beside their ethereal presence. Still, the twins followed without hesitation, settling onto bar stools with perfect posture as Brendan moved behind the counter, hands fumbling slightly as he poured drinks. He set 3 glasses of Terran whiskey on the bar, a rare luxury he usually reserved for his own private moments. 2 unexpected reunions in one lifetime, he muttered, raising his glass. The sisters mirrored his gesture with identical elegance. Ivana sipped delicately while Lena took a bold swallow, her eyes widening slightly at the burn. Human alcohol is fascinating, she said, examining the amber liquid with curiosity. It's honest, Brendan replied with a wry half-smile. Hits hard, but doesn't lie about it. He leaned forward, bracing his forearms on the counter. Now, not that I'm not pleased to see you both alive and thriving, but I doubt you tracked me across the galaxy just to share a drink. The twins exchanged another silent look, their expressions shifting subtly. Finally, Ivana spoke, her tone carefully measured. We have come to offer you a position. Brendan blinked, startled. A position? We own the Celestial Tides Resort on Lumraya Prime, she explained. Perhaps you've heard of it. Brendan gave a short bark of laughter. Not exactly in my social circle, but I gather it's fancy. The most exclusive resort in the Lumari collective, Lena confirmed, her voice tinged with pride. We cater to the elite of 17 species. Brendan studied them skeptically. And you want me to, what, 10 bar for rich aliens? We want you to manage our hospitality operations, Ivana clarified smoothly. Your experience running this establishment, combined with your military background, makes you uniquely qualified. Brendan's eyes narrowed. He had seen their kind of poise before, diplomats, intelligence operatives, people who weighed every word. There was something more here. That's very generous, he said slowly. But I'm an old man with a tavern on a backwater colony. What's the real reason you're here? For the first time, their composure wavered. Lena glanced at her sister, who gave a slight nod. When Ivana spoke again, her voice was quieter, stripped of polish. The resort is real, as is our offer. But you're right, there's more. Our resort sits beside a restricted facility operated by the Draconid Imperium, and we need your help. For a long time, the only sound in the tavern was the faint crackle of the stove and the muted howl of the wind beyond the walls. Brendan let their words hang in the air, measuring the weight of them. Draconids. The name alone conjured memories. He had tried to bury memories of battlefields, scorched by plasma fire, of comrades torn apart by reptilian claws of war, councils debating how many human lives could be traded for a tactical victory. He stared into his whiskey, watching the amber liquid ripple as though disturbed by ghosts. Finally, he raised his eyes to the twins. Start talking. Ivana leaned forward, her voice pitched low, serious. The Draconid Imperium established a research installation on Lumraya Prime under the guise of a scientific exchange program. Officially, they are collaborating with Lumari scholars on neural studies. In truth, they are conducting experiments illegal, horrific, on Lumari citizens. Experiments, Brendan repeated flatly. What kind of experiments? Genetic manipulation, neural conditioning, attempts to alter the pathways of the mind itself. Lena's voice hardened, the melodic lilt of her species turning sharp. Our parents' research began as an academic study into Lumari neurochemistry. But when the Imperium realized its military potential, control, coercion, weaponization, they demanded more. Our parents refused. That refusal cost them their lives. Brendan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He remembered the explosion at the xenobiology lab, the whispers of sabotage. So it wasn't an accident. No, Ivana's eyes gleamed with quiet fury. It was an assassination. And now the Draconids are continuing their work, perfecting it using unwilling subjects. Brendan rubbed his temples. The story had the stink of truth. He had seen the Imperium's methods firsthand, had watched them grind weaker species underfoot, always cloaking conquest in the language of progress. Still, one question gnawed at him. And where do I fit into this? I'm a tavern keeper on a frozen rock, not an intelligence operative. You are more than that, Lena said firmly. You are a soldier who understands tactics, security infiltration, and most importantly, you are human. Brendan raised an eyebrow. And that matters because the facility's biometric systems are calibrated for Lumari and Draconid physiology, Ivana explained. They have no human staff, which means their scanners will not be designed to detect you. You can walk where neither we nor our allies can. Brendan sat back, absorbing the implication. He could slip past their defenses simply by existing. A dangerous edge, but also a dangerous temptation. Surely the Lumari Collective has its own operatives, he said. People trained for this sort of work. The sisters exchanged another of their silent glances, their expressions tightening. The collective's leadership is compromised, Ivana said carefully. Political and financial entanglements with the Imperium prevent them from acting. Official channels are closed to us. If anything is to be done, it must be done in the shadows. Brendan let out a low laugh devoid of humor. So you're telling me 2 resort owners decided to play spies? Lena leaned forward, her luminous eyes locking onto his. We are not playing, Brendan. We have the resources. We have the motivation. What we lack is your expertise. He studied them for a long moment. They were no longer the shivering children he had found in the snow. They were poised, confident, dangerous in their own way. And yet, beneath the polish, he still caught glimpses of those frightened girls clutching bowls of soup in his kitchen. This is about more than justice, he said slowly. This is about your parents' research, isn't it? The data colonial security was sniffing after 10 years ago. The twins nodded in unison. Ivana's voice softened. Our parents entrusted it to us before the explosion. We've kept it hidden ever since knowing it would be deadly in the wrong hands. It is the missing piece the draconids crave. Brendan swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the liquid catch the light. A part of him screamed to refuse. He had carved out a life far from wars and shadows. He had earned his peace. But another part, the part that had made him a soldier, recognized the familiar call of duty. He could ignore it, but it would never stop echoing. "And what exactly do you expect me to do?" he asked at last. "We need evidence," Lena said. "Proof of what the draconids are doing. With it, we can expose them to the wider galaxy force, both the collective and the Terran Union, to act. And we need to rescue the test subjects before they are lost." Brendan's eyes narrowed. "And you think you can get in and out of a fortified draconid installation without raising alarms?" "We don't just think," Ivana replied with quiet confidence. "We know. We've been preparing for years." Brendan studied them in silence. Their conviction was palpable, their determination unshakable. Still, the weight of it all pressed down on him. At his age, infiltration meant more than risk. It meant likely death. He pushed back from the bar, pacing to the window. Outside, the Lumari starship gleamed like a shard of starlight against Nix Nine's drab skyline. It looked absurd here, a jewel fallen into the mud. Behind him, Lena's voice softened. "We wouldn't ask this of you if we didn't believe in you. 10 years ago, you gave us warmth and food when no one else would. You saw us as children worth saving. That kindness saved our lives. Now we ask you to help us save others." Brendan's throat tightened. He kept his gaze fixed on the snow outside, unwilling to let them see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned back, his face at the soldier's steel returning. "When do we leave?" The identical smiles that bloomed across the twins' faces were answer enough. The starlight remembrance rose from Nix Nine's frozen surface like a dream breaking free of nightmare. From the moment Brendan stepped aboard, he realized he had underestimated the twins' transformation. This was no simple pleasure craft. Though draped in luxury, its bones were military stealth systems hummed beneath panels of luminescent alloy engines, whispering with power far beyond anything permitted on civilian registries. The lounge itself could have hosted a delegation of diplomats, wide curved windows, opening onto the swirling lights of hyperspace furnishings crafted from shimmering materials that shifted hues with the angle of view. Brendan, in his worn jacket and boots, felt like a relic in a museum. Yet the twins had no time for indulgence. Within hours of departure, they cleared the lounge of its jeweled chairs and floating sculptures, replacing them with mats, weapons case, and tactical holograms. Again, Brendan barked, circling them like a drill sergeant. Ivana and Lena moved through an infiltration drill, their grace almost inhuman. They slipped through simulated hallways, ducking beneath imagined sensors, coordinating their steps with uncanny synchronicity. Still, Brendan's eye missed nothing. "Ivana, your footwork is too rhythmic. Vary your step. Predictability gets you killed." "Yes, sir," she replied, instantly adjusting her pattern without hesitation. Lena lunged, miming a takedown. Brendan's voice snapped like a whip. Telegraphed a draconid sentry would spot that a kilometer away. They reset and ran the sequence again and again. 3 days into the journey, the twins' elegance had hardened into precision, their natural synchronization sharpened into a tactical edge. Brendan found himself surprised at their aptitude. Resort owners numb, these were operatives in all but name. During breaks they spoke. Brendan demanded answers. How does a pair of starving kids on a frozen rock end up owning the most exclusive resort in the collective? Ivana accepted a glass of water, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. "After we left your tavern, we stowed away on a supply transport. We carried our parents' data crystal disguised as a necklace, a Lumari tradition jewelry passed as heirlooms." Smart, Brendan muttered. Lena continued. "We ended up on Meridian Station, a trading hub, where no one looks too closely at stray children. We survived by our wits." "You mean stealing?" Brendan interrupted dryly. She met his eyes without shame. "Yes, food clothing information. We learned quickly what to take and what to avoid. Only from those who could afford the loss, never more than we needed." Brendan grunted. He had seen enough of the galaxy's underbelly to understand survival. "And then we crossed the wrong terminal," Ivana admitted. A Vexari information broker caught us trying to access his files. His name was Javix. Brendan raised an eyebrow. And he didn't hand you over to security. He saw potential, Lena said with a faint smile. He taught us how to refine our skills, how to slip through systems unnoticed, how to trade secrets instead of trinkets. He trained you as spies, Brendan translated bluntly. As information specialist, Ivana corrected. By the time we were 17, we were earning fees from corporate clients, legal mostly. Corporate espionage is tolerated in most sectors. And the resort, Lena's eyes gleamed. 3 years ago, the Celestial Tides was failing financially. We purchased it for a fraction of its worth, renovated, and turned it into the jewel of the collective. Its location was no coincidence. Brendan leaned back, arms crossed. You placed yourselves next to a Draconid research facility. Ivana inclined her head. We've been tracking their activities for years, waiting for the right moment to act. Now we have it. Brendan let silence stretch. Their story rang true, but he saw the layers beneath the calculation, the discipline forged from desperation. He felt an odd pride swell in his chest. Against all odds, they had survived and thrived. Still, something gnawed at him. Why me? There must be thousands of ex-military with fresher experience. The sisters exchanged a look that was not their usual silent calculation, but something softer, almost vulnerable. Ivana spoke gently. Because you showed us kindness when no one else did. You saw us as children, not liabilities or assets. That memory never left us, Lena added quietly. And because humans have something the Draconids fear. Adaptability, unpredictability. You are the variable they cannot account for. Brendan chuckled grimly. In soup making, don't forget. The twins smiled in unison. For a moment, the weight of missions and secrets lifted, and Brendan saw them not as operatives or heiresses, but as the girls he'd once sheltered from the cold. It was on the fourth day out that Brendan met the rest of their team. The strategy chamber had been converted from a sunroom windows, replaced with armored plating and hollow projectors. 3 figures rose as the twins ushered Brendan inside. This is Nex, Ivana introduced. The Vexari male clicked his mandibles politely. His exoskeleton was paler than most of his kind, almost translucent, lending him an eerie appearance, our technology specialist. Commander Thorne, your reputation precedes you, Nex said through his translator voice, dry as static. Brendan raised an eyebrow. Commander, that's a stretch. We may have, embellished, Lena admitted with a sheepish smile. Siri came next, a Turellian female whose iridescent scales shifted color with mood. She inclined her head respectfully. I have studied human physiology with great interest. It will be an honor to work beside one so resilient. Brendan nodded cautiously. He had fought alongside Turellians once. Their loyalty was fierce. And finally, Ivana set her tone, shifting slightly, our security consultant. A human figure turned from the hollow display. His hair was shorter, streaked with gray, and a scar cut across one cheek, but Brendan knew the face instantly. His gut clenched as though struck. Hello, Sarge, said Daniel Foster. For a heartbeat, Brendan could not breathe. Foster had been his lieutenant, his second in command. 15 years ago, he had died on Proxima Centauri, killed when a covert operation turned into an ambush. Or so Brendan had believed. Foster, he rasped, his voice cracked with fury and disbelief. You're supposed to be dead. The man's mouth twisted into a humorless half-smile. Technically, I am. Daniel Foster died in that operation. I go by Dan Reynolds now, private security consultant. The twins looked between them, sensing the tension. You know each other, Ivana asked carefully. Brendan's jaw clenched. We served together until this man led us into a mission that got half our squad killed. Foster's expression hardened. That's not the whole story, Sarge. It's enough of the story, Brendan snapped. Silence stretched taut and dangerous. The twins exchanged uneasy glances, but neither interrupted. Finally, Lena cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps we should focus on the mission at hand. Reluctantly, Brendan tore his gaze from Foster and turned to the holographic projection. Nex activated it, revealing schematics of a facility nestled in Lemria Prime's mountains. This is the Draconid installation, Nex said, officially designated a cultural exchange center. In truth, it extends 4 levels underground, heavily fortified, more so than we anticipated. Security, Brendan asked, slipping back into professional focus despite his simmering anger. Triple-layered perimeter, sensors, atmospheric monitors, calibrated to detect non-draconid pheromones, and a full complement of elite Vanguard troops. Brendan's eyes narrowed. That's not a research outpost. That's a fortress. Exactly, Siri said, her scales dimming to a troubled hue. Foster folded his arms, which means our original infiltration plan is worthless. We'll need something else. The tension in Brendan's chest eased, replaced by grim clarity. Whatever grudges lingered between him and Foster would have to wait. There was a job to do, and the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. The Celestial Tides Resort had been built to dazzle, and tonight it delivered on that promise with merciless brilliance. Towers of crystal and living coral shimmered with refracted light, while bioluminescent gardens spilled down terraces toward the sea. Above it all, Lumari architecture curved like frozen waves, graceful and fluid, designed to impress the galaxy's elite. The annual Galactic Harmony Gala was the pinnacle of that design, an evening where 17 species mingled beneath floating sculptures of light and sound. Music rippled like liquid across the air translator module, weaving dozens of tongues into a single comprehensible melody. Dignitaries, magnates, and officers moved among the crowd, resplendent in silk's armors or scales polished to mirror-bright shine. And into that opulence stepped Brendan Thorne. He barely recognized himself in the mirrored walls as he descended the grand staircase. The tailored formal attire, cut in sleek Terran style, but embroidered with subtle Lumari accents, fit him better than any uniform he had ever worn. His hair, usually unruly, had been trimmed neatly, and even his worn boots had been replaced with polished shoes that pinched slightly. He looked against all odds, every bit the wealthy human benefactor the twins had invented for him. In his earpiece, Foster's voice murmured, "Remember Sarge, casual, confident, a man of means enjoying an evening. Your cover is as important as theirs." Brendan muttered under his breath, "I was never good at pretending to be anything but a soldier." "You'll manage," Foster replied dryly. "You always do." Across the ballroom, Brendan saw Ivana and Lena make their entrance. Every head turned. They wore gowns of woven silver that seemed to drink in the light and release it in radiant waves. Their hair, like moonlight given form, cascaded over bare shoulders, and their luminous eyes sparkled with controlled allure. Even among aliens of a dozen shapes and colors, they were breathtaking. More importantly, Brendan noted how the Draconid researcher Tar stiffened as they appeared. Tar was a massive specimen, nearly 7 feet tall, scales a deep emerald traced with crimson sigils of rank. His vertical eyes narrowed, tracking the twins with unmistakable hunger. Brendan's stomach tightened. The plan was simple in outline, but fraught with peril. The twins would lure Tar into a private meeting during the gala, exploiting the Draconid's known susceptibility to Lumari pheromones. There they would coax or compel him into revealing access codes to the research facility. Meanwhile, Brendan and Foster would maintain covert watch, ready to intervene if things turned violent. Simple plans, Brendan knew, rarely survived contact with reality. He moved toward one of the grand pillars, positioning himself with a clear line of sight. The crowd's chatter swelled and ebbed like waves, the scent of alien perfumes mingling with roasted delicacies carried by floating trays. He scanned the room, every instinct alert for threats. Then a voice, smooth and cold, slid into his ear, not through the comm, but from just behind him. "Sergeant Thorne, I must admit I didn't expect to find you here." Brendan turned slowly, every muscle tensing. Standing with a flute of champagne in one hand and a smile carved from ice was Colonel Richard Vance. Time seemed to collapse. Brendan saw him as he had 15 years ago, commanding Officer Chris' uniform, the man whose orders had led them into the ambush that killed half their squad. The man who had vanished afterward, presumed dead or disgraced, yet here he stood, older streaks of silver at his temples, but his eyes still sharp, predatory, utterly devoid of warmth. "Vance," Brendan said evenly, forcing his voice to stay level, "I'd say it's good to see you, but that would be a lie." Vance chuckled, softly. "Still direct as ever. I admire that truly. Last I heard you were wasting away in a tavern on Nix 9, and now here you are dressed like a statesman. I must say you wear it better than I expected." Brendan's grip tightened on his glass. "What are you doing here? Since when do traders get invited to galas?" Trader Vance tilted his head, the amusement flickering. "Such a limited word. I prefer pragmatist. The Draconids represent the future Brendan. Their advancements in neural modification will change warfare forever. Humanity can either embrace that revolution or be crushed beneath it. I chose to ensure our species has a seat at the table. At the cost of innocent lives, Brendan said coldly. Acceptable losses, Vance replied without hesitation. For the survival of the greater whole, you of all people should understand sacrifice. Before Brendan could respond, his earpiece crackled with Lena's urgent whisper. We have the codes, but Tar revealed something else. The test subjects aren't being moved, they're being terminated tonight. Brendan froze, terminated. Every captive, every child slated for death within hours. Understood, he murmured into the comm, forcing his face to remain neutral. Proceed to extraction point Alpha. Vance's smile widened as though he had heard every word. Problems with your little friends, Tar can be quite perceptive despite his species' weaknesses. The realization struck Brendan like a blade of ice Vance had known. This was no chance encounter. It was a trap. What have you done? Brendan demanded quietly. Nothing yet, Vance replied smoothly. But I should inform you your team's activities haven't gone unnoticed. Lieutenant Foster's cover, for example. Compromised months ago. Brendan's pulse spiked. If Foster had been compromised, then a voice broke through his panic. Sir Foster said as he appeared at Brendan's side, face carefully neutral. He gave a crisp nod to Vance. The transport is ready. Vance's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Excellent. Escort Sergeant Thorne, would you? Brendan tensed, ready to fight his way free. But Foster leaned close, his lips barely moving. Trust me, he whispered. For a heartbeat, Brendan warred with instinct. Then he allowed Foster to guide him toward a service corridor, keeping his posture compliant. I'm disappointed, Brendan Vance called after them. I expected more resistance. Only when the heavy doors closed behind them did Foster release his grip and draw a concealed weapon. We don't have much time. The twins are safe. They're already heading for the facility. Brendan rounded on him. What the hell is going on? Foster's expression was grim. Vance isn't just a traitor. He's compromised. The Draconids tested their neural tech on him. He's fighting their control, but losing. He thinks he's working for humanity's future, but half the time he's their puppet. Brendan stared, cold dread pulling in his gut. And you? I went underground after Proxima, Foster said quickly. Been working to track Vance ever since. Triple agent, if you like. Couldn't risk telling you earlier. I had to be sure you weren't compromised too. Brendan exhaled sharply. The truth or some version of it fit, but there was no time to unravel lies. Then we move. The twins can't do this alone. Together, they raced through service tunnels, emerging near a transport where Nex and Siri waited with equipment. Engines roared as they launched into the night, speeding toward the mountain facility. The gala still sparkled behind them, a symphony of light and laughter. But for Brendan, the illusion of safety had shattered. The enemy was closer than ever, wearing a familiar face. And in the hours to come, choices made would decide not only the fate of the Lumari captives, but the ghosts of Brendan's own past. The transport screamed across Lumraya Prime's skies, its engines howling as they pushed to maximum output. Inside, Brendan strapped into a harness, the weight of his weapon heavy in his lap. The familiar feel steadied him. He had thought his soldiering days behind him, buried under years of tavern dust. Yet here he was, charging toward another battlefield, heart pounding with the old rhythm of war. Beside him, Foster checked his rifle with the ease of long practice, face set in grim focus. Nex hunched over a datapad, mandibles twitching nervously as he monitored signals. Siri prepared med kits, her scales dimming to a somber shade. Every face reflected the same awareness they were heading into a fight few expected to survive. The twins already breached the outer perimeter, Nex reported. Security systems are compromised temporarily, but Vance will have alerted them. Resistance will be heavy. Brendan grunted. Good. Makes things simple. Heavy resistance means we're in the right place. Minutes later, the transport skidded to a halt at the mountainside. The air shimmered with the stench of ion discharge, and alarms blared from within the facility. The main entrance stood ajar, scorch marks blackening its frame. They've been busy, Foster muttered, stepping into the smoke. Inside, bodies of Draconid guards littered the halls, not dead, Brendan noticed, but convulsing from neural disruptor blasts. The twins had honored their Lumari ethic of restraint, disabling rather than killing. Smart, Brendan said approvingly. But it'll slow them down. We need to catch up. They pressed deeper, cutting through pockets of resistance. Brendan's commands came as naturally as breath cover left. Push right. Suppressive fire, move, move. The team moved as though they drilled for years, not hours. Old instincts snapped into place. The soldier in him reawakened. At last, they reached the subterranean containment level. There in a chamber of steel and glass stood the captives, 12 Lumari gaunt and trembling eyes wide with terror. Among them were 3 children no older than 8, their small bodies marked with cruel diagnostic implants. Ivana, Brendan called. Relief flashed across her face as she turned, supporting a weakened adult Lumari. Lena was beside her, working frantically at a control panel to release restraints. We need to hurry, Ivana said. The self-destruct sequence is active 15 minutes. Of course it is, Brendan growled. Working together, they freed the last captives. Siri administered rapid doses of neural stabilizers, while Nex began plotting the fastest escape route. The group moved as a fragile column, Brendan and Foster guarding the flanks. They had almost reached the main level when the way ahead darkened. Figures emerged from the shadows, elite Draconid Vanguard troops, armored and armed, blocking the exit. And at their center stood Colonel Richard Vance. He looked every inch the officer Brendan remembered, but twisted his eyes, glowing faintly with unnatural light. His movements too precise, too controlled. A puppet half aware of its strings. I can't let you leave with them, Vance said calmly, voice carrying over the alarm klaxons. The research is too valuable. It's over, Richard, Brendan shot back. The facility's set to blow. There's nothing left to salvage. Not true, Vance countered. They still carry their parents' original data. The missing piece. With it, the process can be perfected. His gaze slid toward the twins, hungry and desperate. Foster stepped forward. Perfected. You mean soldiers who can't disobey? Weapons that look like people, just like what they did to you. For a moment, something flickered in Vance's expression. Pain, regret, the ghost of the man he had been. It's too late for me, he said hoarsely. The modifications are irreversible. Maybe, Brendan said, his voice steel, but it's not too late to remember who you are. You swore an oath to protect humanity, not sell it out. Vance's jaw clenched, the struggle visible in his trembling hands. Then his face hardened again. He lifted his arms, snapping, kill them all. Retrieve the data crystals. The Draconid troops raised their weapons. But before they could fire, Vance spun, drawing his own sidearm and blasting the nearest Draconid through the chest. The soldiers hesitated in shock. It was the opening Brendan needed. Now he roared. Gunfire erupted the corridor, filling with smoke and light. Brendan moved with lethal precision, each shot dropping a soldier. Foster fought beside him, their movements grimly synchronized as if no years had passed. The twins unleashed their disruptors, bodies glowing faintly as they pushed their pheromonal advantage, sowing confusion among the Draconids. When the last guard fell, silence crashed down, broken only by the hiss of sparking circuits. Vance staggered, clutching his side where a Draconid's return fire had burned deep. He slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his uniform. Get them out, he gasped, voice ragged. I'll hold the exit. Buy you time. Brendan knelt beside him, torn between fury and pity. Still giving orders, Colonel, he muttered. Vance managed a weak, pained smile. Some things never change. Now go. Let me do one thing right. For a long heartbeat, Brendan searched his face, weighing the sincerity. At last he nodded. Hold them as long as you can. He rose, barking orders to the others. Together they herded the captives toward the surface, alarms welling louder with every step. Behind them, the thunder of fresh Draconid reinforcements rolled through the corridors. Brendan didn't look back, but in his mind, he saw Vance standing tall, weapon raised, buying their lives with his own. They burst from the facility into the cold night air. The mountains shook beneath their feet as explosions thundered within. A final detonation ripped through the structure, collapsing it into itself, fire and stone vomiting skyward before being swallowed by darkness. The transport engines roared, carrying them away as the mountain crumbled. Brendan sat in silence, the rescued Lumari huddled around him, their eyes wide with gratitude and fear. Across from him, the twins leaned against each other, exhaustion etched into their features. No one spoke of Vance. His name hung unspoken heavy as the ash drifting in the wind. 3 months later, the galaxy spun on, oblivious to the battle fought in shadow. The Draconid project was gone. Its research destroyed, its facility erased. Official reports credited an anonymous human operative with exposing the atrocities, presenting humanity as the ethical backbone of the galactic community. On the terrace of the Celestial Tides Resort, Brendan watched the sun sink into the ocean, painting the waves in crimson and gold. For once, peace filled him. Not the empty peace of isolation, but the quiet after a storm, earned and fragile. Footsteps approached. Ivana and Lena joined him, their gowns fluttering in the evening breeze. The last of the rescued have been placed with families, Ivana reported softly. The children are responding well to treatment. And the Imperium, Brendan asked. Without the data, they have abandoned the project, Lena said firmly. For now. Behind them, Foster approached with drinks. He was older, wearier, but a strange lightness had returned to his eyes. They raised their glasses together in silence. Then Ivana spoke, her smile warm. The resort needs a security director, someone with experience, with wisdom, and with excellent soup. Brendan chuckled, the sound rusty but genuine. You offering me a job? We're offering you a home, Lena corrected gently. Brendan looked at them, their luminous eyes, their resilience, their unshakable bond. Against all odds, these girls had become women of power and conviction. And somehow, impossibly, they had pulled him into their orbit. He exhaled slowly, feeling something he hadn't known in years, belonging. I might need to redecorate my quarters, he said dryly. That fancy alien decor gives me headaches. Their identical laughter rang like music against the sea breeze. Brendan raised his glass, watching the sun's last light fade. A bowl of soup, a loaf of bread, and a choice made in the cold had carried him here into a future worth fighting for. The Celestial Tides Resort had resumed its rhythm of luxury and diplomacy, but for Brendan, life had taken on an entirely new cadence. He was no longer just a tavern keeper on a frozen rock. Nor was he a soldier marching under distant banners. Instead, he had become something he had never expected: guardian mentor, and if he admitted it to himself, father figure to two extraordinary Lumari women and their growing circle of allies. Days bled into weeks as Brendan adapted to his new role. His quarters were practical compared to the crystalline extravagance of the resort. He stripped away the floating sculptures and light reactive fabrics, replacing them with solid furnishings of wood and steel, shipped in from human colonies. It was his way of carving out a piece of earth amid alien beauty. Guests might find the decor rustic, but Brendan preferred it. He needed reminders of where he came from, not illusions of grandeur. His duties stretched far beyond personal taste. Security for a resort catering to the elite of 17 species was no small task. The Celestial Tides drew ambassadors, magnates, and dignitaries, each bringing entourages, secrets, and potential threats. Brendan oversaw patrol rotations, reinforced surveillance grids, and ran drills that left even the most complacent guards sweating. You treat this like a military installation, Ivana teased one afternoon, as she watched the squad complete a timed simulation of an evacuation. It's not a game, Brendan replied gruffly. If something happens here, it won't just be a scandal in the tabloids. It'll be a diplomatic incident that could spark wars. We can't afford mistakes. Lena, standing beside her sister, tilted her head with a small smile. And yet, for the first time in years, you look alive while barking orders. Brendan couldn't deny it. Purpose suited him better than solitude. The twins themselves were busier than ever. Officially, they were resort owners, hosts to the galaxy's most powerful guests. Unofficially, they were still running a quiet war against the Draconid Imperium, dismantling remnants of the neural research program and rescuing those caught in its shadow. Brendan found himself pulled into those missions more than once. While he complained about being too old for this, he couldn't deny the fire that surged when a new plan demanded his input. Training sessions continued in private halls, the twins honing their infiltration skills under his watchful eye. You're naturals, Brendan admitted one evening as they completed a flawless drill. Too good to be resort owners. Lena exchanged a glance with Ivana. Resort owners, operatives, survivors. We've had to be many things to survive, but with you, we can finally be ourselves. The words struck Brendan harder than he expected. He had once dismissed them as not his problem. Yet now they were the closest thing to family he had left. The ghosts of the past still lingered. Foster, alive against all odds, remained at the resort as a consultant. His presence was both a balm and a wound for Brendan. Old camaraderie warred with old betrayal. Their private conversations often circled back to the same unhealed scar, Proxima Centauri, the mission gone wrong and the men lost because of Vance's choices. One evening over a bottle of aged Terran whiskey, Brendan finally asked the question that had gnawed at him for years. Why didn't you come back? After the ambush, after you survived, why leave the rest of us thinking you were dead? Foster's gaze was heavy with regret. Because I couldn't risk the truth leaking? Vance was already compromised, and I suspected Terran intelligence knew. I went dark to follow the trail. I thought cutting ties would protect you. Brendan's fist clenched around his glass. Protect me. You left me bearing ghosts alone. I know, Foster said quietly, and I'll carry that guilt until I die. But if it helps, we got him in the end. Vance died buying us time. Brendan swallowed hard. He hadn't spoken Vance's name since that night. The Colonel's sacrifice haunted him. Was it redemption or just another manipulation? The question would never be answered. Still, he nodded. Then let's make sure it wasn't for nothing. For the first time in years, Brendan and Foster clinked glasses without hostility. Beyond personal scars, the galaxy itself was shifting. Word of the Draconid atrocities had spread, carefully released through the right channels. Officially, the Terran government took the credit. Unofficially, whispers circulated of 2 Lumari heiresses and a grizzled human sergeant who had broken a secret program wide open. Reputation followed them. Guests arrived at the resort with veiled curiosity, some asking sly questions, others offering quiet thanks. Brendan ignored most of it. Fame meant nothing to him. But he did notice the way the rescued Lumari children, now growing stronger under therapy, sometimes looked at him with shining eyes. To them, he wasn't just a soldier or a tavern keeper. He was the man who hadn't walked away. One evening under the alien stars, Brendan found himself on the terrace with the twins. The ocean glimmered beneath twin moons, waves rolling in soft, endless rhythm. You could have left me behind, he said suddenly, surprising even himself. When you found me on Nix 9, you could have chosen anyone. But you came back for me. Ivana's expression softened. Because you came back for us first. When no one else cared, you opened your door. Lena added, that one choice changed everything. We carry it with us always. Brendan let the silence linger, then finally admitted, you're the daughters I never had. The twins smiled, luminous eyes reflecting the moonlight. And you are the father we never thought we'd find, Ivana whispered. For a long time, they simply stood together, a family forged not by blood, but by choice. Months later, the resort hosted another gala. This one was quieter, less about diplomacy, more about unity. Representatives of multiple species gathered not just to celebrate wealth, but to discuss safeguards against future abuses of neural technology. Humanity's reputation as an ethical voice was solidified, and the Lumari Collective found new allies in their struggle against the Draconid Imperium. Brendan stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Ivana and Lena move gracefully among their guests. They were poised, confident, but when their eyes met his across the room, their smiles carried the memory of 2 starving children in a snowstorm. Siri approached, scales glimmering in approval. You look proud, she observed. I am, Brendan admitted. They've built something beautiful out of ashes. And so have you, she replied gently. Later that night, after the guests had retired, the core team gathered in the strategy room. Next displayed fresh intelligence, scattered remnants of the Draconid project regrouping in hidden corners. Foster outlined possible missions to dismantle them. The twins listened, their resolve unshaken. Brendan leaned forward, studying the holograms. His bones ached, but his spirit burned with the old fire. He wasn't done yet, not while threats still lingered. We'll hit them hard, he said firmly. And this time we won't wait 15 years to act. The room nodded in agreement. The war wasn't over. But they weren't alone. On another dawn, Brendan stood once more at the railing of his terrace, watching the ocean blaze with sunrise. He thought back to Nix 9, the howling wind, the cold that cut to the bone, the 2 girls trembling against a stone wall. He had almost walked away, almost left them to fate. Instead, he had offered a bowl of soup and a loaf of bread. That single act had rippled outward, shaping destinies, toppling empires, saving lives he'd never know. Brendan Thorne, once a weary soldier, once a lonely tavern keeper, had found something greater than survival. He had found family. And for them, for the fragile thread of hope they represented, he would fight as long as he drew breath. The ocean roared below, eternal and unbroken. Brendan squared his shoulders, the weight of years lighter than it had been in decades. The future stretched wide before him, uncertain but worth protecting.